Hi, welcome to valuationpodcast.com, a podcast and video series about all things related to business and valuation. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I'm a company valuation expert in St. Louis, Missouri. I have the privilege today of discussing strategic planning and how to sell a business today with Jennifer Smith, a business broker in Cape Girardeau, Missouri with Murphy Business. Well, and return on investment, or ROI, that you kind of are discussing is a very interesting concept because, like, what I've heard other people talk about, and you can correct me, is that if I'm going to go buy a business, can I make my money back on it in the next 5 years or 3 years? And that threshold is what I'm looking at as cash flow coming in. What's the risk of the cash flow? And then how quickly am I going to basically make the money that I gave you on day one back over the future? Is that kind of, or can you give us your perspective of kind of what return on investment is?
Yeah, so you're looking at ROI exactly right. And ROI, return on investment, is even important in the Main Street environment. It's just not the primary driver, because if a business owner is producing earnings that are low enough that a buyer is looking at it and saying, you know what, I'm going to have to pump a lot of additional capital into this because the purchase price is so high that it can't service its own debt, the buyer's not going to be interested in that. They're going to move on and find something else that can service its own debt, where they're not going to have to pump in a bunch of additional personal capital to get it where it needs to be, and something that can pay them reasonably well for running the business and doing what they do. So that return on investment concept, it's more important in the middle market and lower middle market, those bigger businesses, but it certainly is important in the mom and pop Main Street environment as well. It's just not quite the primary driver in the way you think. It's a little more practical than that.
Well, and I think conceptually where that comes in is that typically when you go to sell your company, you're like, well, in order for me to retire, I need $5 million. And so I'd like to sell my company for $5 million. And you'll have people that said, great, let's go to market and we'll do that. But if a buyer looks at it and says, this isn't worth $5 million because of the cash flow and the risk, then you're really just kind of going down a path that's not going to be successful. And that's probably why you can't just, as a seller, create the number that you want to sell at, because you might not have a buyer that is willing to pay that. So talk a little bit about maybe how you guys price some of those companies.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Melissa. A buyer doesn't care what you need to retire. Your debt is your problem, right? The buyer doesn't care what kind of debt you have or what kind of price you need to get out of the debt. They care about how much cash flow the business is generating. And they're willing to pay a multiple of that cash flow, right? They're willing to pay a reasonable price for that. But, they really don't, it sounds kind of cold, but they just don't care about your personal situation, right? The business is worth what the business is worth, and they're not going to pay you more just because you want it or need it or you need to be able to pay off the bank. So, you're absolutely right in your thinking on that.
And sometimes this is why, it's interesting because in this space, everybody says you need to plan to sell your business like 3 to 5 years before you really want to sell. And a lot of people think that's just kind of marketing fluff. But the reality is, what we want you to do is look at what an outside person, you do valuations and so do I. What would an outside person say this company is worth? And let's say it's $3 million. Well, you got 2 more years to increase your revenue, your profit, clean up your books, make it more efficient, market, do whatever, so that you can get to that $5 million number, but you can't just make it appear from nothing. And so that's one of the reasons why people say to get those valuations done sooner, mostly so you have some knowledge about what you could really sell for. Is that, there's a lot of reasons to plan ahead, but that's one of the main ones, right?
That's exactly right. We actually have just created a relatively new service called value coaching surrounding that very concept, which is, hey, AKV, always know your value. Where we plan 3 to 5 years in advance. We do annual valuations. We do quarterly coaching to try and get that value up where it needs to be. We do monthly videos about things that we're seeing in everyday life with business owners to help them and coach them and guide them toward that magic number, whatever they want in that 3 to 5 years. Because too often they kind of come in blind. They come in blind and come in hot, and they're just not sure what the value is. And they're really disappointed and sometimes devastated to find out that it just isn't what they thought it was. And you're right. It sounds like a lot of marketing hype to say, hey, 3 to 5 years. And it sounds like we're just, trying to pump up valuations, but that's not the case at all. It's a matter of building awareness, building knowledge, and having some time to build a strategy, to build value, and time to implement that.